How can someone balance reality of a project?
Implement the strategies.
This is SoundView's Executive Insights. My name is Andrew Clancy, Senior Editor for SoundView. I am very pleased to be joined today by Doug Conant, the founder of Conant Leadership and the former President, CEO, and Director of the Campbell Soup Company. Doug, thank you for joining me.
It's great to be here.
You've written and spoken in the past about the idea of being an idealist, realist leader. That's such an incredibly powerful concept. Can you tell us how you arrived at that philosophy?
Well, it's an interesting story. It comes from a book that's fairly dated now. It's called The Art of Thinking. And a CEO I worked for at Nabisco, John Grennis, gave the executive staff this book and had us read it and had us fill out a form in the back that helped us understand our thinking types. And one of the thinking types, much like a Myers-Briggs would be in terms of behavioral types, was an idealist realist. And that was the space I landed in when I took this thinking quiz, which took about 10 minutes. I commend it to people. It's really very interesting work. And in the book, they had a metaphor, an analogy of what an idealist realist would be like. And they talked about a nurse who wants to serve people, but is also willing to deal with the reality of that, the blood and the guts of dealing with service. And that is sort of my nature as well. I want to serve the corporate community, in this case, as CEO of Campbell Soup Company, but I'm more than willing to roll up my sleeves and deal with the reality of that mess. And you know, if you think about some of the work Jim Collins has done about confront the brutal facts, he challenges people to look at the reality of their situation with clear eyes. I think it's essential if you want to be a leader in this century that you be very clear-eyed about what you're dealing with and you be willing to roll up your sleeves and do the work. And so that's how that has found its way into my life.
At that time at Nabisco, when you did that evaluation initially, were you alone in that regard? Were you the only idealist realist, or were there others?
I'm pretty, in that regard, I was fairly unique in that group. The interesting thing to me was, it was at a time where we were in dire straits at Nabisco. We had just been part of the world's largest LBO. A book was written about it called Barbarians at the Gate. KKR owned us. And we were trying to rebuild the company following that traumatic episode. And it was a very toxic culture, a very challenging culture. It was hard to remain idealistic while you were dealing with the reality of that. But I think people want to get to higher ground, and if you don't see it, and you don't have an intentional notion of leading to higher ground, it's hard to get people to follow you. So I think you have to be idealistic. You have to be looking for higher ground always. But people also want to believe that you're dealing with the reality of the situation, not just your wish of what the situation is like.
For leaders that feel trapped on one side or the other, where they feel that maybe they're somewhat more idealistic and need to get to that midpoint of being a blend of idealism and realism, what can they do? Let's say there's someone who's a staunch realist who wants to reinvigorate a stagnant work culture. How do you get to that middle ground?
I don't know that it's a middle ground. I think I would challenge people to think that you have to get to the high ground on both sides of that equation. It's not moving off of one and so that you can move forward. It's about embracing the genius of the and here. I have to be idealistic and realistic, and I have to do both sides of this equation in a world-class way. So for someone who's anchored in the reality of the situation, I would challenge you to find a path to higher ground that the organization, and do that with great intentionality, find a path that is appealing to people, and then leverage your ability to contribute your understanding of reality to getting there. And if you're anchored in the idealism side of this equation, maintain that. but then surround yourself and partner with people who understand the reality of it so that you're building a bridge to this new ideal in a way that's credible with the people with whom you live and work.
There seems to be that blend of optimism and realism. It has a mirror in some ways in what one's words are versus one's actions. And how does a leader determine the difference between delivering a great message versus letting his or her actions speak for themselves?
Again, I go back to this. You have to do both. It's a challenging world. You have to have a compelling message, but then you have to deliver on it. And you have to walk the talk if you want to have credibility with the people that you're working with and you're leading. And unfortunately, you have to deliver on both sides of the equation. I watched the first presidential debate, and our president was having trouble, saying I walked the talk. I had a compelling message, but I had trouble. It's tough times out there. It hurt his credibility, and he acknowledged it. They acknowledged it, and I think that's true of all leaders. You want to create a compelling message, but people want to understand and want to believe that you understand viscerally the reality of the situation, and you have clear eyes about how you need to get through it.
For leaders that are in a similar situation where they come into a company on the wings of that idealist nature, and they're confronted with reality, what can they do to bring it up front? And sometimes that's a challenge to deal with that situation when you actually get there.
Yeah, there are a couple observations. One is you have to prepare yourself to deal with it before you get there. So you have to have all the skills developed, the leadership skills, the organization skills developed, so that when you confront that reality, you have the experience and the knowledge of how to deal with it. Some leaders don't have those skills. They have the vision, but they haven't yet developed the leadership skills in terms of leading organizations through the mundane things of what you have to do every day to deliver against that. So the first observation I'd make for any leader, for any aspiring CEO or leader of a work group, is the time to develop the skills is before you need them. So, you need to, I believe, one needs to work very purposefully in terms of thinking through where they want to be with their career and their contribution profile, and then building the skills, assets, and capabilities necessary so that when they have the opportunity, they'll be in a position to deliver on it. It's a very unforgiving world. If you don't deliver, you don't have the chance to deliver again. So, it's very Darwinian. You grow or you die. And ideally, you choose growth because it beats the alternative. and the growth needs to be cultivated before you're in a position where you really have to deliver on it.
You had said once in an interview that anyone can be a leader in any moment. What's involved in the process for getting employees to understand that and to enable someone, let's say an employee who recognizes a quality control issue, to be willing to speak up and to take that leadership role?
I think a couple of things. One is, I think if you want to create a culture where people are comfortable speaking up in a candid way, the one thing you have to do as a leader is promote a high trust culture. High trust, high performance culture. If you don't have the trust, it's hard to get the performance from all corners of the organization because people will keep their head down. So I focus first and foremost on building a high trust organization. When you think about building a high trust organization, you think of two dimensions. You think of a high character organization and a very competent organization. You want to create an organization where people of high character are valued and respected, and people of high competence are also valued and respected, and you challenge them to bring both of those characteristics to every interaction, character and competence. If you do that over time, in my experience, you can create a high trust culture. Then I think that everyone intuitively understands that each one of us has an ability to lead in a moment. When I'm talking to somebody on the line, when I'm touring a factory floor, they know what they're doing, I don't. And so if there's an issue on the line, they know that they're the person to go to. They know they're the go-to person. They have the expertise, the knowledge, the ability to contribute in the moment that I don't have. And I think people naturally know who you go to. You know, you and I were speaking right before we got on this interview, and I have issue with my IT. I'm not the guy to go fix my iPad right now. I know who to go to. It's JD. And so I think people naturally know who you go to. You just got to create an environment where those people are comfortable contributing.
The workforce today, it has perhaps the most diverse workforce in history. And it's from both a cultural perspective and also from a generational span. And I know you've discussed this in the book Touchpoints that you co-authored with Mette Nørgaard. But what can leaders do to find that common thread between workers, but also maintain the personal touch that you've written and spoken so much about?
Well, there's a lot in that question. First of all, personal touch is important. In my experience, if you want people to take you seriously and to personally engage in the work, then they need to believe that you take them seriously and you're personally supportive of who they are and what they're trying to become. It doesn't work any other way. If you don't care, if they don't believe you care, why should they care? And so I do think you have to bring the personal commitment to the work there, and the personal commitment to the people has to be ever present. And you have to find ways to do that work for you. What I have found, the common thread is not dealing with the differences, the generational differences, or the cultural differences. The common thread is dealing with what they share in common, because they can all talk about that. It creates a platform for coming together while you acknowledge all the differences. My observation is the common platform in the workplace is the fact that the interruption age is upon us. I go talk to an audience and I say, how many emails do you get a day? 100, 200, keep your hand up, 300, 400. How many text messages? How many phone calls? How many people are stopping by your offices? It doesn't matter, what generation you are, right?
Right.
People feel as if they're getting a sip of water from a fire hydrant, and it's spilling over them. And they hunger to deal with that world in a more effective and efficient way, and to be a better contributor to the success of the organization. They all share that. And as we talk about how we deal with what they have in common, they naturally come together because we've created a platform for common dialogue. And so I think the answer to moving forward is to search out what's in common, build on that, and that draws all the different constituencies to the same place.
There is a word you use that I want to repeat, because I think it's what separates a lot of the work that you do and the philosophies you have. That it was when you said that it's important for the person to believe that you care. Mm-hmm. Because on one hand, I think in a lot of respects, CEOs are always attempting to make sure that there's an understanding that they have the interests of the organization at heart. But the important part is for the individual employee to believe and understand that the leader cares. And that's what separates that philosophy.
I think there has to be quality alignment between what you say and what you do, and it has to be palpable. I believe this notion that's popular today, the language around it is built around authenticity. It's what you see is what you get. And if what I see is what I get, then I'm more comfortable letting you see me and giving of myself more completely. And absent that, it's just not credible. And I would amend your observation. It's beyond CEOs. It's leaders of today. It's leaders in nonprofit sector. It's leaders in the public sector, leaders in the private sector. It's parents. Is there quality alignment between what I say and what I do? Is it credible? And if it's not, shame on us. We're not doing well enough.
When you were at Campbell, you had brought in executives from a variety of organizations. I know you'd said there were people from Pepsi, Procter & Gamble, General Mills. Many of those leaders, you had said at the time, they were still speaking the language of their previous organization. I found it to be such an interesting observation. What did you do to help unify them under the Campbell vision? Well,
we created it collaboratively together. But just to step back, we did have to make significant changes at Campbell when I went in 10 years ago. The company had been in what a friend of mine, Jim Kiltz, former chairman CEO of Gillette, called the circle of doom, where the company had been troubled for several years and needed some fundamental change. And over the first 3 years I was there, we turned over 300 of our top 350 leaders, which in my consumer packaged goods experience I've never seen before, and in my corporate experience I've never seen before. We promoted 150 people from within who were young Turks, anxious to contribute, had the capacity to contribute more. But we did step outside and hire 150 leaders, aspiring leaders from outside of our company to help us reinvent ourselves. And they did come from the Pepsis and the Procter & Gambles and the General Mills of the world. And all those cultures had unique perspectives, unique languages, and we sort of had a United Nations of consumer packaged goods executives, and we needed to get to common language. So together we created a common sense of mission, a common sense of values. There are three key values I think any organization needs. You need people of high character, high competence, and then they have to have good chemistry. They have to be able to work together effectively, and they have to have demonstrated that in prior work experiences. We were able to recruit people, high character, high competent, good teamwork people. And so we had the basis for making things better, but then we had to create a common language. And that was sort of a fun part of the journey. We created a mission, a vision, a set of strategies that we all adhered to. We created what we called the Campbell Leadership Model, which was our true north in terms of what we expected leaders to do. We created language around that. We created an employee value proposition that was in the language of Campbell, and we created some core processes where we got everyone on the same page, speaking the same language. So 10 years later, or 7 years after we went through that part of the experience of change, we've now got a culture that has its rudder in the water, has its own identity, and now our new CEO, Denise Morrison, is taking it to higher ground.
You were faced with a pretty unique challenge while you were at Campbell. The company's products had long been one of the symbols of comfort here in the United States and globally. But there became an increasing demand for healthier choices in that particular market. Those two ideas seem a little counter to one another. How did you end up handling the situation?
Well, I sort of reject that notion. I mean, that's the interpretation of it, and that was the interpretation of it by a lot of audiences.
Right.
Our product, I mean, we were selling tomato soup, vegetable juice, and bread. That's what our company sold. I don't look at those things as being horribly unhealthy.
Right.
All right? I never did. So I reject the notion. That having been said, there were people that were concerned about the sodium in our soups. There were people that were concerned about some of the sodium in our vegetable beverages, and we had to address that, and we did over time. But I think our portfolio had good qualities from the beginning to the end. I think that it's better today. I do think every organization has to be tuned into the environment in which they're operating. And you do have to have a continuous improvement mindset. You know, how do we meet the needs and wants of our consumers faster, better, more completely, and more uniquely than anyone else? You have to ask yourself that question. You have to ask that question every day. And in our case, consumers were asking for us to lower the sodium levels while maintaining the taste. And not an easy thing to do.
No.
In fact, we've gone too far at times where we've tried to lower the sodium levels to make activist groups happy, but then nobody wants to buy the product, you know, because they actually have to eat it. So, and so we walk that tightrope all the time. But the notion, if you're in a consumer packaged goods space, and I assume in any space really, you have to focus on meeting the needs of your consumers faster, better, more completely, and more uniquely than anyone else. And that's what we did at Campbell. And it was more than just nutritional qualities. People in food look for 5 things. They look for taste, nutrition, convenience, variety, and value. And you have to be constantly innovating on all those dimensions. We were selling soup and having people prepare the soup the same way for 100 years. It was a can of soup, you pour it in a pot, you add water, and you make soup. The microwave was invented in 1947. It took us until 2002 to think about putting soup in a microwave container. Why it took us 55 years to get to that point, I don't know, but we had to be more relevant to today's consumers, and we created a microwavable platform that today is hundreds of millions of dollars of new business. And so we had to improve on the convenience dimension as well as the wellness dimension. But we also had to have the right variety. We had to have the right value. So it's a complex equation.
Doug Conant, thank you so much.
Good. I hope it was helpful.